audience here. So I leave the ground to Francesco Silos Rabini for introducing Mario Ricciardi.
Thank you very much. So Professor Mario Ricciardi teaches philosophy of law at the State University of Milano and legal methodology at Luis Guido Carli University in Rome. He has been the director of Italian magazine Il Mulino since 2018 and currently writes for various publications, including L'Espresso, Il Sole 24 Ore, and Il Riformista, so some Italian dailies and journals. Mario was one of the founders of the association ROARS in 2012, and he has contributed to our activities with many discussions and also many articles. So Mario we will be giving a seminar entitled Meritocracy as Ideology, an Italian Perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you, Umberto. I hope do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Thank you. I'm very sorry not to be there with you. I mean, a very packed agenda with several meetings in different parts of Italy forced me to choose between different places, so I will be with you only online. What I will try to do is just presenting some remarks on the way in which meritocracy understood as an ideology, because according to my reading of the meritocratic theme, I don't see, I mean, I don't have any quarrel with the idea of recognizing and rewarding merit where merit is to be found. I think that it's possibly impossible for conceptual reasons. It's not an empirical problem, it's a conceptual problem, to devise a unified metric of merit. So you can accept the idea that you should reward merit, but this doesn't mean that you can impose a unified metric on the different dimensions of merit in different kinds of activities, and of course in the field of education, which is the one which is most close to our interests, this afternoon. So my problem is not with the idea of merit. I'm not against merit or against the rewarding of merit. I am critical. I mean, I have very deep normative reasons to be critical of meritocracy as an ideology. My arguments against meritocracy are the arguments that have been already, I mean, I agree fully with the arguments that Michael Sandel has put forward in his paper, and also with the arguments that before, I mean, in 1971 were put forward by John Rawls in his Theory of Justice, where there's a short passage in which he criticizes the idea of meritocracy. And I am very much in sympathy with the remarks that Daniel Markovits has presented now. So I shall not repeat or rehearse these arguments again. I mean, I'll take for granted that these are arguments that are familiar to the audience, and that as far as I'm concerned, at least I agree with. And I will try to do something different. I will try to say something on meritocracy as an ideology. The first part of my short talk will move from an article, a column, that was published in 2001 in a British newspaper. And I'll read now a short passage from the very first lines of this column. I'm quoting: "I was sadly disappointed with my 1958 book, The Rise of Meritocracy. I have coined a word which has spread widely, especially in the United States, and has recently found a prominent place in Mr. Blair's speeches. The book was a satire intended as a warning, which, needless to say, has not been acted upon, to warn of what might have happened in Britain between 1958 and the imaginary final uprising against meritocracy in 2033. So the reader, the person who was writing this article in 2001, is Michael Young. Michael Young was a sociologist, an intellectual, a politician. He was a member of the Labour Party, and was indeed the person who invented, who coined the word meritocracy. Is the one who created the word meritocracy, a word which has spread, as Michael Young said in 2001, and this is still true today, has spread widely in the new century. The article from which the lines which I've just read was published in The Guardian. And The Guardian, as you know, is a newspaper which is regarded in UK as being of leftist tendency, of leftist leanings. Young was, as I said, a member of the Labour Party, and indeed was a prominent policy maker at the time when Clement Attlee was the leader of Labour. When he was writing this article in 2001, he was very old, and it was, he was not very much involved anymore in the life of the Labour Party. There was a new leader, Tony Blair, who was in many ways far from Clement Attlee, who was a kind of more traditional social democrat with respect to Blair. Michael Young was in 2001 a member of the House of Lords. He was elevated to the House of Lords with the title of Lord Young of Darlington, which, interestingly enough, is the name of a progressive school with which Michael Young was linked throughout his life. And in this article, from which I've read a passage, the elderly politician was going back to his book written in 1958 and reflecting on the failure of decades spent in favor of an inclusive educational system. Young understood an inclusive educational system as one which does not limit itself to photographing, to just having a snapshot of existing class differences, and that reproduces them through selection mechanisms that are indifferent to the students' starting conditions. So he was an advocate of a progressive idea of education whose aim was to remove barriers for people coming from underprivileged background to have an education. In 2001, Young was disappointed by the way in which Tony Blair was using the word meritocracy. And by the way, he was pointing out that in his idea, the rise of meritocracy is a satire, is not to be understood as an essay. as a work of social science, it's a work of narrative. And actually it's an open question how far many people who use the word meritocracy, and I will say something about this with respect to the Italian situation in a moment, are aware of this satirical character of the word meritocracy in its origin. In the article from which I've quoted already, there is a passage which I think is particularly timely, and it is still worth reading today. Michael Young was addressing the issue of the way in which meritocracy was being used in England, in the United Kingdom at the time, as a justification, and to a certain extent as a smokescreen for educational policies which were not in favor of the underprivileged in society. And he writes with respect to this topic, the elite has become so self-confident that there is almost no obstacle to the prizes it arrogates to itself. All constraints of the business world have been eliminated, and as the book predicts, his book, they have been exploited in every way to beautify their nest, the nest of people who come from the elite. Salaries and wages have skyrocketed. Generous share option schemes have proliferated. Golden bonuses and informal deals for those at the top have multiplied. It is worth emphasizing that Lord Young was hardly a communist. As I said, he was a traditional social democrat. And when he died, 1 year after having written this very sad reflection on the topic of meritocracy, that we might regard as his last word on the topic of meritocracy, he was universally celebrated as one of the leading members of a generation of reformers who helped to build a more just society for Britons. Among other things, he was responsible, for example, for the birth of the Open University and also for the devising and putting in place of a more advanced system of consumer protection. So we're not talking about somebody who came from the far radical left. He was a traditional reformist social democrat. But he was a strong, a very sharp critic of the meritocratic ideology that had taken hold in the United Kingdom during the period of the Blair governments, hence with the complicity of the left, and his remarks in his article, I think, are still very relevant today, and are relevant indeed for other countries beside, I mean, that are not countries that he had in mind when he wrote this article. In the conclusion of the article, he says, it is hard indeed in a society that makes so much of merit to be judged as having known. No underclass has ever been left so naked from a moral point of view. This was in 2001. 7 years after the publication of this article, an Italian former business consultant, whose name is Roger Abravanel, published a book in Italian whose title was Meritocracy, that is meritocracy. A book which is interesting in many ways. I mean, one of the reasons why it's very interesting, because in the book there are some references to Michael Young's book. If I'm not wrong, I'm relying on memory here, but I think there are 4 references to Young's book. And neither of these references makes clear that the book is a satire. And then when you read Abravanel, I mean, there's a passage in which Abravanel, for example, comments on the meritocracy equation, which is something that is, of course, in Michael Young's book, but is meant as a satirical version of a kind of pseudo-technocratic mentality that he was satirizing at the time in the late 50s. But this is mentioned in Roger Abravanel's book as if it is a genuine piece of social thinking. And you might wonder, reading the book, if Abravanel was aware of the fact that Michael Young's was a satirical book. Abravanel's book was very much all over the place in Italy around 2008. It was quoted by politicians on the right. At the time, the education minister, the education and university minister of the Berlusconi government, Maria Stella Gelmini, said that she viewed this Abravanel book as a point of reference for the university reform that they were going to implement, and which was the reform which, among other things, introduces in Italy a very disputable and disputed indeed system of a research evaluation that is administered by ANVUR, that is this independent body about which I think you will discuss in other sessions. So this book was very much an inspiration for politicians on the right. But what is interesting, that was as much an inspiration for politicians in the left wing. I mean, at the time, the Italian left was very much trying to follow the path that Tony Blair had already gone through in the United Kingdom. And so they were very keen in using whatever soundbite that they could took over from New Labour and to use it in Italy. So meritocracy became a kind of battle cry on the left as well. And one might wonder why this happened. My interpretation in retrospect is that the idea of meritocracy was an essential rhetorical tool in a time in which the consensus, the policy consensus, which had driven economic policy and indeed also institutional reform after 1989, the basic neoliberal toolkit, we might describe it to simplify, to give an idea of what was happening at the time. This framework of policy ideas was already entering a critical moment. Abravanel book was published in 2008, and 2008 is the year in which we have the starting of, I mean, the crack of what's the name of the bank? I can't remember the name of the
Lehman
bank.
Brothers.
Lehman Brothers, exactly, the crack of Lehman Brothers. And it was the first of different moment of crisis in the neoliberal paradigm that we are witnessing still today. I mean, that crisis started a whole set of consequences we are dealing with today yet. So this was a moment in which it was crucial to have a rhetorical argument that could be used in order to give a moral justification to a system of distribution of rewards in society which was highly unfair, and it was progressively more clearly unfair as long as the crisis was unfolding. I mean, in the following months, the crisis, I mean, the first step of the crisis is, of course, in September 2008. And then with the following years, there are different voices who start criticizing what was happening in the capitalist West. I mean, I point out Michael Sandel's book on justice, for example, was one of the books who were articulating this kind of criticism after 2008. And this was exactly a time when many people were pushing forward this idea of meritocracy as a justification for the system of distribution of rewards, which was in place in many Western societies. And this urgency, I mean, the urgency to use meritocracy as a rhetorical tool was even more strong in the left than in the right, because of course the left, the new left, I mean, the left of New Labour, of the so-called Third Way, was very keen to having a rhetorical tool that could be used in order to defend what was indeed a step back with respect to the kind of social democratic consensus which was built by people by Michael Young, which was based on an idea of widespread public education, affordable for anyone, universities which were, think about the British system, I mean, a very generous and large system of public education, which made public education and indeed university higher education, affordable from people from disadvantaged background. This system was being progressively shrinked by new economic policies. And as far as the left was in charge, while these economic policies were put in place, it was essential to have a rhetorical device which might be used to argue that these policies were indeed just, that the system should not be criticized because it was a meritocratic system, was a system which was embodying an idea of just reward in a way. So meritocracy became an ideology. And it's interesting to see how, I mean, it stopped to be a satire and became an ideology. And it's interesting to see how since 2008, the discourse of meritocracy has become even more aggressive in Italy. In the last few years, we have assisted to many books and lots of articles in the main newspapers that defend meritocracy, normally without addressing the critics. I mean, I've never read, apart from Marco Sant'Ambrogia's book, and it's a pity that Marco is not with us today, but apart from Marco Sant'Ambrogia's book, I've never read a serious critique of authors like John Rawls or Michael Sandel or Daniel Markovits or others who have written critiques of meritocracy as an ideology. And there has been a lot of, a lot of propaganda, one might say, on this topic. That is, I think, the reaction of those who want to defend the actual system of distribution from criticism that is increasingly increasingly forcible in the fact that it's so evident that the system doesn't work fairly, that it's becoming more and more difficult to argue in defense of the actual system of education based on so-called meritocracy. I might stop here my introducing remarks, and maybe I don't know if Francesco or Umberto have something to say, or I mean, if there is a discussion.
Thank you very much, Mario. I think that the best thing to do is to see whether somebody has a question for you.
Someone wants to intervene, must come here to.
Just a quick question.
Mario. Yeah, but then you have to come here.
Where can I speak?
You can speak here.
Okay. Hello, Mario. I would like you to comment about the fact that now
Giuseppe De Nicolao is also a member of the ROARS Association. For those
Okay.
who don't know him.
Hello, Mario.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Okay, great comeback. Okay, I would like to ask you to comment on the fact that now we even have a Ministry of Education and Merit in Italy. What do you think about this step?
It's pure 1984. I mean, it's it's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, meritocracy is an ideology, and so you should put forward this merit mantra, and the best thing that you can do is write the word merit on your shields, like the Emperor Constantine did with the cross. No, I mean. But it's pure propaganda, and it's so clear that it's pure propaganda, because the arguments that are, I mean, there's an international debate on this. I mean, I've never read a serious article in any Italian newspaper criticizing Michael Sandel's ideas, or Daniel Markowitz's ideas in meritocracy. I mean, there have been reviews. Some people say, America is different from Italy, or I mean, but nobody ever take issue with the substance of the argument. And the reason is that there is no counter-argument. There is no counter-argument. It's just propaganda.
Yes, Mario, I agree with you, but then it comes a question. So why, if there are no criticism, if nobody is able to make an argument, no, apart Abravanel, who is a very peculiar case. So why this ideology is has been a driving force of the reform of Italian university, and why our colleagues have just accepted everything without any kind of reaction?
That's an interesting point. First of all, the Italian university didn't have a good merit rewarding system in place. And that was a big problem. I mean, of course, one of the reasons why there was a call for reform, it was because the university was recognized as not working properly in many ways. So there was a need for change. One might argue, and this is my idea, that change was already happening in the years when the Germini reform was put in place, and was happening in many ways through a renewal of the academic profession, older people going out and younger people coming in, people who in many situations do had an international training, which wasn't that common for people before our generation. I mean, this was a big change. I remember when I was called as a professor at University of Milan, in those years, many people from my generation entered as professors. And with some of these people, we had, I mean, in the past, we were colleagues in UK, for example. We had met at international conferences. So the academic profession was changing very much, but was changing at a slow pace. And the change maybe wasn't yet very strong in some areas in the country. It was probably stronger in the north than in the center or in the south. So there were good arguments in favor of reform. The thing was that the reform was implemented with a very ideological frame, and taking as a model a kind of, I mean, it was partly the British system with the, of course, with the research assessment, but dumber in many ways than the British system. And of course, this was at the time when in UK, people were already criticizing the way in which their research assessment was working. So Italy, I mean, if there was a good argument in favor of a system of research evaluation, there were also many things from which Italy might have learned in terms of experiences in other countries which had implemented before Italy systems of research evaluation. We didn't anything of the sort. The reform was pushed through because it had a very high level of popularity, and all the newspapers were arguing for the reform. And we all remember, I mean, the newspaper columns were that were published to defend that reform. And after that, it became a system that was very much part of the idea that the fundamentals of our system of distribution of the rewards in society is fundamentally fair, and that doesn't need tampering with at all. So that was the reason why once it was in place, remain in place, and of course a left which had moved towards more neoliberal positions was defending the system. As we know, I mean, the Democratic Party in Italy was as much in favor of this new system as the right wing. Why some colleagues, one might say even many colleagues of our generation, were in favor of this new system? This was quite clear because they were the winners in the new system. I mean, we all know that this. I mean, those of us that had more, a better record, international record of publication, that had access to the international journals, they had big gains with this system. And of course it was, and it was interesting. I mean, an historian of the academy in the future might track the fractures in the academic world after the reform with respect to who were the winners and who were the losers. I mean, historians versus theoreticians, people who worked on general topics and then had access to international debate, from people who worked on topics of merely local relevance, which of course was more difficult to publish internationally. I mean, it's, think for example, history. If you are an Italian historian, you work on the history of Italy, it's, it's very difficult that you might find a large audience in English. I mean, you might publish a book that is written for an international audience, but inevitably most of the history of Italy will be published in Italian, as most of the history of France is published in French. But there was a time after the reform in which, and you will all remember that, I mean, this was the attempt to totally push on the sidelines people who were published their research in Italian, because this was understood to be backward. I mean, from my personal point of view, being somebody who has always worked on Anglophone authors, I mean, I did have quarrel with that as far as my personal interest was at stake. But I think that the system was really done with respect to what you expect from a public university that is, among other things, of course, contributing to knowledge, and indeed the circulation of knowledge with respect to the national community. So it's really absurd to actually disincentivize people to publish in Italian. I mean, it's like shooting in your own foot. It's very a silly thing to do, but this was what happened in many fields in Italy.
Oh, yes, thank you. Just a comment from my point of view. I mean, the fact that there were good arguments to criticize the university system, that the university was not working well. I mean, is not so clear at that point, because I think that there was a lot of cherry picking in the sense that you are just taking some examples to show this is something that doesn't work. Of course, there is a fraction of things that don't work in any kind of system. I mean, if you think about my field, which is physics, I mean, we had in 10 years 2 or even 3 Nobel people that were very close to have a Nobel Prize, that has spent the whole career, and one, of course, got it last year, and that has spent the whole career in Italy, and they have created a school. And this school is one of the most strongest school in the world. So, I mean, from my point of view, I wouldn't say that the Italian was something that was not working. What was really surprising for me is that instead of analyzing the system, looking at what was working and understanding why it was working, even if there was a structural problem due to the finance and so on, they have decided to have this ideological view that the system was not working, that la retorica è il secchio bucato, and instead of identifying the real problems, some fake problems have been identified, and then things went in the wrong directions.
Yes, Francesco, but we all know what is the explanation of this. I mean, they wrote university, but what they taught was economics. So that was the point. I mean, since the beginning, it was so clear. I mean, all the articles we were arguing for, they were all thinking about the discipline of economics, what was wrong, according to some people, in the discipline of economics in Italy, and what was necessary to remove those problems. I mean, they didn't care about history or philosophy or archaeology or literature or physics or mathematics. I mean, economics was the point, and that was the reason why the reform was implemented as it was. I mean, we all remember which were the people who were arguing in favor of the change, the books which were written which were discussing basically economics departments. So I mean, the absurd thing was that nobody in the political system took issue with this idea. I mean, there was nobody who raised the question that you have raised here. But I mean, let's do a map. Let's see what is going on. Let's see what are the excellencies in Italy. I mean, there were excellencies in humanities, for example, very strong. I mean, people still come in Italy to start some disciplines. But of course, the people who were arguing for the reform didn't care about that, because the problem was not the university. The problem was the Italian economy. And I'm not taking issue with the fact that the economy is important. I'm taking issue with the very ideological way in which they thought that a certain model of university might be used to give a boost to the Italian economic system, which was something highly disputable.
Okay, so is there anyone who wants to still add some words? Please, you have to come to the desk and please present yourself and
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yuri. I'm associate professor at the Close University, almost here in Bolzano. So thank you for this occasion. I was very happy to see that this initiative of ROARS was taking place close to my place of living and working. I think that also based on what the international guests have told us, this meritocratic system has considerably led to some kind of homologation. I think in many articles that I read also on ROARS, among the others, this is quite well recognized. So also as researchers, we tend to stay on the safe side, not to go through risky research, and especially to go against the flow of the system. And I found, especially in the international, in the speeches of the international guests, that they would align at least to some extent with my view. My question is, was this actually decided by the Gelmini Reforma and this emphasis on meritocracies, or this went well beyond their expectations? Because they served the system in a very good way. And unfortunately, while university and education should be the places where critical thinking is formed, I think they are one of the most homologated places in Italy. And doing this job, working in universities, it hurts me a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know who wants to pick up on this question. Maybe Mario.
Yes, Umberto. No, as I recall what happened at the time, I would say that the right-wing politicians, I mean, the Berlusconi's party, who were in charge of implementing the reform, didn't have a deep understanding of what they were doing. I mean, they were acting very much on the impulse of what they read on some newspapers, and of course, which were, I mean, the major newspapers in the country, so they were very influential, and on what was kind of common sense at the time. I mean, that there's very much a Gramsci undertone in this story. I mean, in a sense, it's a story about how an hegemony is constructed and how it might enter into a crisis when the economic and the social situation changes. At the time, it was very much in the air. No, Italy was regarded as a country which was behind other Western country. We weren't quite fully modern as the others. And the model that was always put as an example of what we should become, what we should aim, what we should strive for, was basically a kind of very creative mix of the British and the US system. I mean, many people will remember the fact that at the time there was all this talk about universities being private and hence more efficient. But then the British system is a public system. It's basically a public system. So the reason why the British universities were efficient were presumably not because they were private, because they were not private in the end. It was perhaps something that was more connected with their very peculiar institutional structure, their very peculiar legal form, and also with a strong tradition of independence, which the political system had never very much tampered with. As a matter of fact, the first government which tried to have a strong influence on the universities using public financing as the tool for influencing the universities was the Thatcher government. And it's very interesting that, for example, this was a major topic in a book published by Conrad Russell, Lord Russell, who was at the time the spokesperson for the Liberal Democrat Party in the House of Lords. This is in the late 90s. He published a book whose title was Academic Freedom. And the topic was exactly this. Under Thatcher, the system of public financing of universities in Britain was changing. Was not anymore just a matter of informal bargaining between the universities and the government, which was basically an old boys network, because very often the people who were representative of the universities were members of the same colleges of the sitting minister of the education. So it was a matter which was dealt amicably between friends. And then with a high level of trust, of course, because the political system trusted the university and vice versa, because it was the same environment, to a situation in which Thatcher has a different idea. The university system must show that the money that is put into the system is well spent. And who decides if it's well spent? Not the academics, the government. So you should tell us what is the upshot on this. What is the social and economic byproduct of what you do in universities? And this changed everything. And Lord Russell, already in the late 90s, was very much aware of this, and was in this book on academic freedom, pushing forward arguments in defense of a system that would preserve universities from too much tampering from the governments. Because he said, and rightly so, it's very dangerous when ministers decide what is the proper course of science. I mean, there must be a very ample scope for disinterested research in order to have a progressive knowledge system, which is, by the way, the model that we inherited from the Enlightenment. And it's partly what explains also the rise of capitalism. So it's interesting, the fact that the very same model that is part of the rising capitalism was dismantled in a different phase of capitalism, supposedly on the argument that this was good for the economy and what's good for production and so on and so forth. Something that nobody, as far as I'm aware, has ever shown. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions about this and very little empirical proof.
Okay.